They had 72 hours before the warship became a floating coffin. The engine room was a tomb of twisted metal and silence, and every engineer who stepped inside came out shaking their heads. The USS Valiant, one of the Navy's most powerful destroyers, sat dead in the water 300 miles from enemy territory, and no one could figure out why. Admiral James Hartwell stood on the bridge, staring at the horizon, knowing that if they didn't move soon, they'd be sitting ducks. But what haunted him more than the fear of an attack was the name that kept whispering through his mind, a name he hadn't spoken in 20 years. The best engineers in the fleet had tried everything. They ran diagnostics, tore apart systems, replaced components, but the massive turbine refused to turn. It was as if the ship itself had given up. To walk through the night, their faces growing paler with each failed attempt. The tension was suffocating. Young sailors who'd never seen combat looked at him with eyes that begged for answers, and all he could offer was a calm he didn't feel. He'd led men through storms and battles, but this silence, this helplessness, was different. It felt like waiting for death in slow motion. And then in the darkest hour before dawn, he made a decision that made his second-in-command stare at him like he'd lost his mind. "Get me Sarah Mitchell," Hartwell said quietly. The name hung in the air like a ghost. His executive officer frowned, pulling up personnel records, scrolling through pages of retired officers and civilian contractors. "Sir, there's no Sarah Mitchell in our database," the young man said carefully. Hartwell's jaw tightened. "She's not in the Navy anymore. She hasn't been for a long time." He turned away from the window, and for the first time in years, his crew saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "Find her. She lives somewhere in Montana. Tell her. Tell her James needs her." The words cost him more than any order he'd ever given. Because 20 years ago, he'd made a choice that broke both their hearts, and he wasn't sure she'd ever forgive him. Sarah Mitchell was fixing a tractor engine when the call came. Her hands were black with grease, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was exactly where she wanted to be. Far from the ocean, far from the memories. The ranch in Montana was her sanctuary, a place where the only battles were against stubborn machinery and harsh winters. When her phone rang with an unknown number, she almost didn't answer, but something made her wipe her hands and pick up. The voice on the other end was formal, military, explaining that Admiral Hartwell had requested her assistance on an urgent matter of national security. She stood there in the afternoon sun, feeling the earth shift beneath her feet. James, after all these years, after he'd chosen his career over her, chosen the stars on his shoulder over the ring he'd promised. She should have said no. She should have hung up and gone back to her quiet life. But deep down, beneath the anger and the hurt, there was still a part of her that remembered the brilliant young officer she'd fallen in love with at the Naval Academy, back when they were both just kids who believed they could change the world together. 12 hours later, she was standing on the deck of the USS Valiant, and the moment their eyes met, 20 years dissolved like morning fog. He looked older, harder, with lines around his eyes that spoke of burden and command. But his eyes, those same gray eyes, held the same intensity she remembered. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice carefully neutral in front of his crew. She nodded once, professional, distant. "Show me the engine." But as she walked past him toward the belly of the ship, their shoulders almost touched, and she felt him flinch. Good, she thought. Let him remember what he threw away. Yet her hands were shaking as she descended the metal stairs into the engine room. And it wasn't from nerves about the job. The engine room was a disaster. Sarah walked through it slowly, running her fingers along pipes and valves, listening to the silence with an attention that made the other engineers feel like amateurs. They'd been looking at schematics and computer readouts, but she was listening to the ship itself, feeling its pain like a living thing. "Everyone out," she said quietly. Hartwell started to protest, but she cut him off with a look that could freeze fire. "I work alone. You know that." It was a reference to the past, to late nights in the academy lab, when she'd solved problems that stumped professors, always insisting on silence, on space to think. He remembered. Everyone left, and she was alone with the machine, alone with the ghost of who she used to be before she'd buried her brilliance on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. 3 hours passed. Then 6. Hartwell paced the bridge like a caged animal. His officers gave him space, sensing something personal in his tension. When the intercom finally crackled with her voice, everyone froze. "I found it," she said simply. It's not the engine. It's the cooling system. Someone installed a counterfeit valve 3 ports ago. It's been degrading slowly, throwing off microfractures that your sensors can't detect. The engine knows something's wrong, so it shut itself down to prevent a catastrophic failure. If you'd kept trying to force it to run, you would have had an explosion that would have killed half your crew. The bridge went silent. A counterfeit part, sabotage or incompetence, it didn't matter. She'd found what a dozen experts had missed. Can you fix it? Hartwell's voice was rough. There was a long pause. I already did. Fire her up. When the engine roared back to life, the entire ship seemed to exhale. Cheers erupted through the corridors, sailors embracing, officers grinning with relief. But Hartwell didn't celebrate. He went straight to the engine room and found her sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, looking exhausted and somehow lighter, as if she'd exorcised a demon. He sat down beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel his presence. You saved us, he said quietly. She didn't look at him. I saved the ship, not us. There is no us, James. There hasn't been for 20 years. The words should have been cruel, but they came out sad, tired. He nodded slowly. I know, and I know I don't deserve to ask anything from you. But I need you to know that not a day has gone by, that I haven't regretted that choice. I thought the Navy was my destiny. I thought command was worth any sacrifice. I was wrong. She finally turned to look at him, and her eyes were wet. You hurt me so much, she whispered. Ha ha! I loved you, and you looked me in the eye and told me that your career mattered more. Do you know what that did to me? I was brilliant, James. I could have changed naval engineering. But after you left, I couldn't stand the sight of ships. I buried everything I was because it reminded me of you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His voice broke. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I threw away the best thing in my life. And seeing you now, seeing what you can still do, knowing that I'm part of the reason you walked away from it, that's a wound I'll carry forever. They sat there in the thrumming engine room, two people who'd loved each other fiercely and lost each other to pride and ambition. And for the first time in 20 years, they were honest. She wiped her eyes, gave a shaky laugh. You always knew how to make me cry, you bastard. He smiled, that old smile she remembered. Does this mean you'll consider consulting for the Navy again? Not for me. For what you were meant to do, she looked at the engine, at the beautiful complexity of it, and felt something stir in her chest that she thought was dead. Maybe, she said softly. Maybe it's time to stop running from who I am. He squeezed her hand gently. And maybe, he said carefully, when this mission is over, you'd let me buy you dinner? Not as an admiral, just as the idiot who let you go and has spent 20 years wishing he could take it back. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face, and finally nodded. One dinner. No promises. He smiled, and it reached his eyes. No promises. As the USS Valiant cut through the waves toward home, powered by an engine that shouldn't have been fixed, but was two people sat in comfortable silence, wondering if second chances were real, or if some mistakes were too big to ever truly mend. But for now, in this moment, there was hope, and sometimes that's enough to keep moving forward.